Good evening. I'm Greer McGearey, President of Seahorse Victoria, and my guest tonight is Jocelyn Bishop. Welcome, Jocelyn.
Thank you.
One of the big standard ways of getting you to tell your story is to say, when did you realise that you weren't quite the same as what people were bringing you up to be?
I would say probably around about the age of 10, 11. I'd spent most of my childhood hanging around with girls, and I never really got into the sports. I felt awkward around other boys. Didn't quite get it. Just didn't quite understand what I was supposed to do. Very late in primary school, when the other boys started noticing girls, they, I don't know, maybe saw me as a threat because I was so close with the girls, and I started to get a lot of teasing. They gave me a girl's name and called me by that a lot of the time, and it very quickly became apparent that something about me wasn't right in their eyes, and I really didn't understand it because I was just being me. But all of a sudden, I was getting these messages that being me was freaky, wasn't acceptable, and I just had a horrible time.
So you're sort of saying it was really about that, grade 4 period in your life, and the kids were sort of becoming a bit jealous of you, I suppose, in a sense, because you're with the girls and they're wanting to be with the girls. Was there any sort of impact at home with what was happening?
No, there wasn't. Certainly not that I was aware of. I've since had conversations with my mother, and she told me about a few things that she had to deal with. She was an emergency relief teacher, and she sometimes worked at my primary school. And there were a few times, and I don't know how old I was at the time, where one of the other teachers would regularly come up to her and say, "Oh, your little boy is playing with the girls again. You need to do something about that." And she would always just say, "Oh, well, his sister has lots of friends around the house. He's just used to girls. He's probably just more comfortable with them." And she just let it go. She never ever told me about it until very recently. So I guess in terms of impact at home, I guess Mum was protective.
Yeah. So you felt that protection all the time, like the love and the care at home, compared to some people I've spoken to, they had much the opposite at home.
Pretty much. Like, I was encouraged to follow my own interests. I was always treated like a boy, except for one isolated incident when I was about 6 years old, where Mum suggested I wear a dress for the day, gave me a feminine name, and just let me go. And then at the end of the day, "Oh, perhaps we won't tell your father about this." And it never happened again. I don't know why she did that. Maybe it was after one of those conversations she'd had with one of the other teachers. I don't know. I remember feeling free and happy, but I didn't have any sort of pressing need to repeat it.
So when you sort of move into secondary school, did that sort of connection with the girls and the jealousy of the boys, as it were, continue?
No. And the main reason is that after my experience at primary school, especially towards the end of grade 6, I made a decision to bury all of that and to do the utmost to present as a boy. So I made a conscious effort to make friends with other boys and try and do guy things. I still couldn't stomach sports of any kind. I was in the school concert band. I auditioned and got into all the school musicals. But there were other boys that did that too, so it wasn't super unusual. I had girlfriends.
So you sort of feel as though it felt like a fairly normal sort of existence.
Yes, in a sense, but it was mostly performative. I didn't really feel, I know this now, but looking back, I know that I didn't really feel a solid connection to that version of myself. I spent a lot of my time trying to figure out what other people expected of me, what was acceptable for me in terms of behaviour and interests and all that kind of thing. And I just tried to navigate that and do the best I could to, perform this male role.
Having sort of buried it and were doing the performative action of being a boy, when did you start to think, I really am different to what I'm doing?
My first clue, and this is less related to gender, was about 14. When I had my first sexual experience with one of my male friends. And that I spent the next 24, 48 hours trying to figure out what the heck that meant, what I was supposed to do with it. And again, I went with, let's bury it. So I pretty much, renewed my decision to ignore all that and keep performing heteronormative boy. That went on for quite some time.
Through my primary school, I never really had, I love my physical activity, the boys stuff, and because I end up being the middle of 5 boys, and it was in my teenage years that, I really thought, I'd love to get dressed, but I would never tell anyone.
I don't think I ever had any moments like that. I was pretty much in denial to myself as well. And I think some of that was due to having a religious upbringing. My mother was very involved with the church, and I became involved with the church because I felt like I needed someplace to belong, where I could be accepted and that I would get, meaning, existential meaning from that involvement. And so I kind of gave myself over to religious, churchy type activities. I became a Sunday school teacher. I became a youth group leader. I eventually went to Bible college and trained to be a minister. I got about a year and a half into that, and something just didn't feel quite right. I ended up moving to doing a youth ministry type focus because I'd worked out already that I didn't have much tolerance for adult religious politics, although I wasn't told specifically that it wasn't acceptable to be anything other than a heterosexual male in any of those contexts. So I couldn't entertain any of those ideas.
That does put an enormous pressure on you to keep it buried. Even though I grew up in a Catholic family in Catholic primary and secondary schools, the one thing I have commented to many people in conversations is that mum and dad weren't dogmatic, and so we were allowed to form our own opinions and take it from there. So, but there was still that sense of this is a side of my life, and I refused to deal with it, but kept it buried for a long time. And it wasn't until later in life that I finally started to try and deal with it, but still going, I can overcome this.
I met my, I'm going to say first wife, while I was at Bible college, just doing some other activities that she was involved in. We were sort of at that, I was sort of at that time where, well, what's the next thing I have to do in this performative man type thing? And I realised I was expected to get married. I was in my late 20s, time to stop playing with kids and get on with things and being an adult human. I went to some religious seminar on marriage and Christian relationships, and the basic message was each person hits a time when they're ready to commit to relationship and to marriage, and we're generally ready to marry whoever we happen to be with at the time. So both my, at that point, future wife and I were at that conference, had the discussion and thought, yeah, well, we're both at that point. We're both ready to do the next thing. We were engaged about 3 months after we met. Yeah, and then I was married for quite a while.
Yeah, like I got married at a young age, and even though I'm formally divorced now, I still get on very well with my partner or former partner. But there was no pressure, whereas it sounds like there was a lot of external pressure feeding into the decision you made.
I felt like there was. I'm not sure that it was actually there, but more like I perceived this pressure to be there because that's what everybody did, and I had to do what everybody does because, I learnt at the age of 10 that if you don't do what everybody else does, they'll make your life a misery.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I kept up that performance, and I'd convinced myself. We ended up I didn't. My wife gave birth to our daughter. I think I was about 32. And she's she's definitely the most important person in my life still.
With that, so you've now got a child and the happy family is in some senses. When did your need to start being yourself start to surface?
Slowly, little bits at a time. My wife and I had a conversation about parenting roles. She was the main breadwinner at the time. I was studying for a diploma of community welfare work. Through a lot of the stuff that I was studying, I'd been challenged in my understanding of gender roles. And so we together decided that we were going to co-parent, and we were going to try and bring our child up gender neutrally, neutral colours. We weren't going to tell anybody what the apparent sex of the child was. We were going to make sure that she had typical boy toys, typical girl toys, and let her make that choice.
Coming from the background and religious environment that you're in, that's a big decision to make, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like I was, from an ultra conservative religious background. It was very progressive, but there was a general expectation of there's a certain way that you are supposed to be. Through some self-examination and stuff that was a part of the diploma course that I was doing, I realised that I started to unbury some of the stuff that was deep down, and what came up first was that I wasn't nearly as straight as I was performing, and so I came out to my wife as gay probably when my daughter was around a year old. We tried to stay together as a heterosexual woman and a gay man for about 6 months or so, and it got to the point where I thought, this isn't working. I'm still denying who I now realise I've probably always been, except now I'm doing it voluntarily. And I'm aware of it, and it doesn't feel good at all. So we talked about separating and what that was going to look like and all that sort of thing. And we made a conscious decision to do it before my daughter got to the age of 3. Knowing as part of my course that in child or infant development, she wasn't going to remember anything prior to the age of 3. So if we had established that we were a split, separated parents, that she wouldn't know any different, and so she wouldn't have that sense of loss. But we wanted to maintain a friendship for her sake, so that she could see that two people could have differences, live in different places, have this connection, and still be civil.
With that approach, how old's your daughter now?
She's 18.
And you were able to maintain a good relationship between the three of you through that 18 years?
I'm going to say no. With my daughter, definitely. We spoke on her mother encouraged her to speak to me on the phone every night. Video calling technology was in its infancy, but we started to try that out. That was such a pain in the neck when she was around 4 or 5 years old, because she'd spend a whole time pulling faces at herself in the camera. But yeah, she got over that eventually, and we still communicate in some way, whether it's by text message or a video chat every day.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And we're still,
because it's important to have that support with your kids.
Yeah, and the reason I say I didn't maintain a good relationship was I met a man not long after I moved out on my own, and he had some issues around trust. He'd previously been in a relationship with a man who'd had a child, left his wife, and then went back to her. And so he was always watching for little clues that I might be about to ditch him and go back to my ex-wife. So I found it very difficult to maintain a friendship with my wife, because then that made my current partner uncomfortable, jealous, angry.
Put you in a difficult position then.
Yeah, it did.
Having decided that, or moved into basically a same-sex relationship, when did you start to twig that I'm not really a male, I'm female?
Not until after I had left that relationship, spent some time getting to know myself as a single person. So I was with that man, a trans man, which still blows my mind, because I never had any clue about my own transness while I was with him. Yeah, I still don't think of him as trans. He was a man first. He just happened to be trans, but he never identified in that way. So I never... We eventually split up after 11 years of a toxic relationship. He was quite emotionally manipulative and abusive towards me. And I think that came out of a lot of his own insecurities and his upbringing and the battle he'd had to have around his own identity. And I allowed him to continue to treat me that way because I knew that he couldn't act any differently. But yeah, we eventually split up, and then I spent 2 years getting to know myself. And about that time, my sister's eldest came out as trans non-binary. And I thought, oh, I think I know what that means, but I'm not totally sure. So I started researching because I wanted to be able to support them, as up until that time, I'd been the only queer person in the family. So, I needed to be the supportive gay uncle and and make sure that I supported them. And it was in looking up what that meant that I thought, oh, I really like the sound of this. This is really appealing. Damn, I wish I was non-binary. And I started watching YouTube videos and of people, generally along the line of, how do I know if I'm non-binary? Or what does it mean for me to be non-binary? And it suddenly occurred to me that the reason it was so appealing is because probably I am. And so I sat with that for a little while and realised that I have always struggled with performing masculinity, but I've never resonated with it, never felt attached to it. Always felt like I had to apologise for everything I performed as a male. Yeah,
that's sort of different to the way I sort of perceive myself. I always sort of, particularly as I got into marriage and was able to access clothes and things like that, that I really did like to present in female clothing, and not, but as my wife would say to me over a period of time, how far will this go? Is this going to be, part-time, or is it, where's it going to go? And my answer was, I don't know. Ultimately, it's where I am now. But, it just sort of was a progression rather than me going out studying, what it is, or learning different terminology or anything. It was just something that slowly evolved.
My only exposure to trans women as I was growing up, until very recently even, was that they were men in dresses who looked like men in dresses and were always the butt of jokes, or the sad mentally ill person in the TV show that gets killed in the first scene, all that sort of stuff. It was all the negative stereotypes. So I couldn't possibly conceive of me being that. So it never entered my mind until I started learning the language and concepts around gender non-conformity, gender identity being non-binary, and I saw that as an opportunity to start demasculinizing myself and throwing off those parts of the performance and presentation that I wasn't comfortable with. And I had in my mind, well, maybe I'll end up being completely feminine. I don't know. I don't object to that, but I don't think I'd make a very attractive woman. So I just, did little things, changed my clothing subtly. My daughter was very supportive. She explained bras to me, helped me choose my first. I started with crop bras. And, to me, it felt like I was getting a hug. There's this pressure that was actually comforting for me. And that's sort of how I started to experience a tiny bit of femininity that no one else was ever going to know about.
And you touched on there that, how your daughter started to help you with your first dressing, as it were. When did you talk to her about it, and what was the reaction?
Very early on, as soon as I got to the point of considering, I think I might be trans, I think I might be, non-binary, I started to talk to her, because I know that she has, in her friendship group at school, she has a lot of gender non-conforming or gender diverse and sexually diverse friends. She goes to a girls' school. But yeah, she's pretty much the only cis-het person in that friendship group. So she was very open to that. She'd grown up with a gay dad for pretty much all her life. So she was quite open, and she's the most amazing ally you could ever meet.
That's fantastic.
The hope I have in her generation is immense.
I've got 4 adult children and 5 grandkids, and even my 18-year-old grandson known about me right from his earliest memories, and doesn't care which way he sees me, whether I've got makeup on or not, or dress or jeans. I'm still a grandparent. So it's really comforting inside to know that you have that support. You've got that support, and you've now really started to come out as yourself. Did you have many challenges from that point, work-wise or anything like that?
No. It sort of came about because of all the lockdowns. I had all that time to myself to think. So I started expressing bits of femininity early on in the lockdown. So everybody's wearing masks and is paranoid about everybody else, don't want to breathe on them, don't want to hear anybody cough in the supermarket. And I bleached and dyed my hair blue. And I was so paranoid that somebody was going to abuse me and point me out as being this terrible trans person, and nobody gave a crap.
No. Here's me being ever so natural blonde. But it is quite liberating to be able to, just walk down the street, catch the train or the tram and the bus, and and everyone else, they look at you, they can see you, but they sort of sense that you're a decent person, so politely ignore you in some ways.
Yeah, I was involved in an online trans support group, Alphabet Soup, and one of the things that they would talk about a lot was confidence, projecting confidence, and that people treat you very differently if you're confident expressing yourself versus if you're looking around terrified that somebody's going to call you out. And once I realised that nobody was going to call me out, that confidence just came to me naturally. And then every time I got rid of some expression of masculinity and took on an expression of femininity, it just got easier and easier. And I've got to the point now where I pretty much only identify as, well, present
yes.
Present as female. People naturally use she and her pronouns with me. I still, my email sign-off says she, they, because I still feel a sense of loyalty to the concepts of being non-binary.
You're now quite openly and comfortable with yourself. What are you doing now to sort of fulfill being yourself?
Well, I'm about 2.5 months into gender affirming hormone therapy. That's been quite a big thing. It's had some effects that I wasn't expecting, an enormous emotional sensitivity now that I didn't have access to before. I actually enjoy crying because afterwards the endorphin rush is amazing.
With that gender affirming, you're becoming more sensitive emotionally and enjoy your crying and feeling a sense of euphoria in a sense with the endorphins sort of flowing through you. How is that implying to other aspects of your life? What sort of external things are you doing now to just be yourself in an everyday circumstance?
I work for Joy 94.9, the Rainbow community radio station. I have a support role there, looking after volunteers and doing some background IT type of support. And I found that to be an amazing environment. They are completely supportive. When I moved, I changed my name from a sort of gender neutral, slightly feminine name to Jocelyn, which is a lot more obviously feminine. They were so supportive about that. Nobody there has ever misgendered me or ever gotten my name wrong once they know what it is. Yeah, and working at the Pride Centre is incredible because there are so many queer people with so many varying presentations that, yeah, I just feel very comfortable and at home in that kind of environment.
And that sounds like a very positive way to finish up our conversation today. Thank you very much for exposing yourself to the public, as it were. I'm Greer McGearey. Thank you for watching Bent TV, and my guest today has been Jocelyn Bishop. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thanks, Greer.